Sometimes, the worst betrayals come wrapped in the most ordinary days. That Tuesday evening was uneventful at first. I came home from work, threw my keys on the kitchen counter, and greeted my wife, Claire, with a casual nod. She was in the living room, smiling at her phone in a way I had never seen before. A faint alarm bell rang inside my mind, but I dismissed it. I had always prided myself on being a trusting husband, someone who valued our bond so much that I never believed she could hide something so monstrous behind that gentle, enticing smile. I was 35 years old, and Claire was 32. We had been married for 8 years. Until that point, I considered our relationship healthy, or at least comfortable. We shared everything from mortgage payments to inside jokes, believing we were on solid ground. During the early years, her eyes lit up whenever I entered a room. Lately, however, her gaze seemed to drift right past me, as if she were picturing someone else. Of course, I told myself that life's stresses might be wearing her down. I never expected the truth would cut so painfully deep, like a poisoned dagger. I remember the phone call that changed everything. Around midnight, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. A strange number appeared, so I answered hesitantly. A man's voice, dripping with arrogance, called me Clueless. He said he was just calling to gloat, as if my wife belonged to him now. At first, I thought it was a cruel prank. Then he mentioned Claire's name, the color of the dress she wore that day, and how she had bragged about my obliviousness. My heart pounded against my ribcage, and I barely found the words to ask exactly who the hell he was. He burst into laughter, like he was enjoying every second of my confusion. Then he said he was her coworker, someone named Dylan. He claimed they'd been sleeping together for 6 months, but they'd been flirting even longer. My entire body started shaking, a mix of fury and disbelief. He told me he wanted to watch me squirm, that he relished how clueless I was all this time. I felt my throat tighten, words stuck behind my teeth. When I demanded proof, he simply chuckled again and said he had plenty, but I should ask Claire for all the details. I ended the call without another word. My hand trembled as I placed the phone back on the nightstand. Claire was asleep in our bed, looking so peaceful it made me sick. I wondered if I was overreacting, if maybe Dylan's call was just a joke, but the man had known too many specifics. My gut told me this was real. Anger pulsed in my veins as I stared at Claire's unsuspecting form, her hair splayed across the pillow. Then an idea sparked. I waited until I was sure she was in a deep sleep, and I grabbed her phone. She always kept it locked, but I knew her passcode, our anniversary date. It felt cruelly ironic that she used that date as a shield for her secrets. My heart pounded so loudly, I was afraid it would wake her. Slowly, I entered the code and opened her messaging app. The first thing I saw was a string of messages with Dylan's name. My stomach twisted as I read their private jokes, their banter about my habits, even my utterly clueless attempts at intimacy. The final straw was a photo they took in my car while I was at work. I could scarcely believe my eyes. The date stamp on that photo corresponded to an afternoon I'd spent working overtime. She had used my car to run errands, or so she told me. Yet here was proof of them laughing together, her hand on his thigh. My rage boiled over, but I forced myself to remain silent. I scrolled further, scanning more damning conversations. They joked about me blindly trusting Claire, about how I was too decent to suspect anything. Tears threatened to fall, but I clenched my jaw and reminded myself I wasn't going to be a victim forever. After carefully locking her phone and returning it to the nightstand, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind buzzed with questions. Why me? How had I failed her? Or was she simply addicted to deceit? Memories flooded back. Our vacations, our late-night talks about having children. I felt nauseous thinking about how hollow those moments must have been for her. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by images of them together. Dylan's mocking voice echoed in my dreams, calling me clueless. By sunrise, I decided I wouldn't confront Claire immediately. I needed a far more cunning plan. I spent the next few days gathering information. I played the role of the clueless husband perfectly, offering Claire a kiss on the cheek before she left for work, asking about her day as if everything was normal. Behind closed doors, I contacted a lawyer friend, not to file for divorce yet, but to understand my rights. I also called in a favor from an acquaintance who was tech-savvy. He guided me on how to clone her phone without her knowing. The entire time, Claire acted as though nothing was amiss, completely unaware that the tides were quickly inevitably shifting. Once I had access to her messages in real time, I began to see the full extent of their affair. They texted each other good morning, shared jokes, and complained about me if I so much as forgot to pick up milk. The betrayal stung, but a cold focus had settled over me. The more they wrote, the more determined I became. I screenshotted every conversation, every incriminating photo, carefully archiving them. Late at night, I read their lovey-dovey nonsense and felt my anger sharpening. I refused to confront her with raw fury. I wanted a grim reckoning, meticulously planned. My chance arrived when I noticed that Claire and Dylan planned to spend a weekend together in a nearby city under the guise of a corporate training session. Claire told me about it with a straight face, claiming her boss insisted she attend. My stomach churned at her brazen lies, but I feigned support, wishing her luck. Secretly, I coordinated with my lawyer friend to gather photographic evidence. I booked a room in the same hotel they would be staying at, determined to capture them in the act. My hands shook with anticipation, but I pressed forward, fueled by wrath. The day of their departure, Claire kissed me goodbye, promising to call if she got a chance. I watched her pack a small suitcase, slipping in a dress I'd never seen before. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile and even helped carry her bag to the car. Once she left, I counted to 10, then rushed to my own car and drove out of town. The entire ride, I rehearsed my plan. I would arrive before them, check in discreetly, and wait. My camera was ready. My mind steeled. I had no intention of letting them wriggle free. I got to the hotel first, as planned. Checking in under a false name took only a little persuasion. Slipping the clerk some cash did wonders. I requested a room on the same floor I'd learned Claire had booked. I recognized the hallway from the photos online, and the tension nearly strangled me. After settling in, I positioned myself near the elevator, feigning interest in my phone. When Claire and Dylan finally appeared, my stomach clenched at the sight of them holding hands, giggling like teenagers. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, the first of many incriminating shots tonight. My heart hammered, but I kept my composure. They didn't notice me. Dylan's laughter grated on my nerves, and I clenched my fists, remembering his taunting phone call. I followed them at a distance, snapping pictures whenever an opportunity arose. Once they were inside their room, I returned to mine and waited. Hours passed. I could imagine the deception unfolding just a few doors away, but I wasn't ready to storm in yet. I needed the perfect moment to catch them red-handed, maybe in bed or locked in an embrace. I wanted concrete proof no one could dispute. No deniability, ever. Just after midnight, I crept into the hallway and placed my ear against their door. Soft laughter spilled out, punctuated by murmurs I couldn't quite make out. With my phone set to record, I knocked softly, then darted around the corner. Dylan opened the door, glancing around in confusion. He wore only a towel around his waist, confirming my suspicion that they were in the thick of it. I managed to snap more pictures before he shut the door. My pulse raced with adrenaline. I almost kicked the door down right then, but I held back, patiently biding my time. Finally, near 2 in the morning, the door cracked open again, and they ventured into the hallway. Claire leaned on Dylan's shoulder, both of them flushed and whispering. I followed at a safe distance as they headed toward the vending machines. When they kissed, I captured every second on video. My hand shook, but I forced myself to remain silent. After they returned to the room, I decided I had enough footage for my initial purposes. Slipping back to my own room, I sent the files to a secure account. My trap was set, and vengeance tasted dangerously sweet. Morning arrived, and I watched them leave the hotel hand in hand, laughing without a care. My blood simmered, but I forced a calm expression and checked out. On the drive home, I contemplated my next moves. I had undeniable proof of their affair. I could confront Claire, but where was the satisfaction in simply exposing her without punishing her betrayal? I wanted her to feel the impact of every lie she'd told me. And as for Dylan, that smug bastard who mocked me, he would learn that I was no one's fool. I was truly, absolutely done playing nice. For 2 weeks, I pretended everything was normal. Claire returned from her training, exhilarated yet clueless about my knowledge. I let her bask in that delusion. Meanwhile, I began quietly liquidating certain joint accounts, moving funds into a separate account under my name. I also paid for a private investigator to follow Dylan, collecting more evidence of his shady dealings. Turned out he wasn't just cheating, he had a track record of questionable financial activities. That information might prove useful. Each day, I smiled at Claire over dinner, ignoring the bile in my throat, knowing the clock was rapidly ticking. On a quiet Friday evening, I made my first move. Claire was in the shower when I slid a manila envelope beneath her purse in the living room. Inside were printed photos of her and Dylan at the hotel, along with screenshots of their messages. I left a short note. I know. Then I left the house, not bothering to say goodbye. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with frantic calls from Claire, but I declined them all. My heart raced, but I felt vindicated. Finally, the facade had shattered. She would realize I wasn't so clueless anymore, ever. That night, I stayed at a friend's place, ignoring Claire's escalating voicemails. She apologized profusely, begging me to come home and talk. The next morning, I returned, finding her tear-stained and desperate. She tried to touch my arm, but I recoiled. She claimed it was a mistake, that she'd been feeling neglected, lonely. My anger flared, but I kept my voice steady. I told her there was nothing to discuss. She was free to pursue her happiness with Dylan. Her face crumpled, but I felt no pity. She had turned me into a fool, and I absolutely wouldn't forgive that. She sobbed, asking how we could fix this. I laughed bitterly, reminding her of every moment she spent mocking me with Dylan. She tried to deny it, so I showed her the text screenshots on my phone. Her eyes widened. In that moment, I saw fear. Fear of losing me, fear of the consequences, fear that I wouldn't let her sweep this under the rug. I told her I'd be moving forward with legal separation. She collapsed onto the couch, wailing. My heart clenched, but I didn't relent. Betrayal demanded consequences, and I planned to see them fully delivered, mercilessly. Claire begged me to let her stay in the house, claiming she had nowhere else to go. I told her she could remain until we finalized our separation agreement. However, there would be no reconciliation. She tried calling Dylan in front of me, possibly hoping to prove something, but he didn't answer. I watched her desperation grow. She finally retreated to our bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room with my fury. I poured myself a glass of water, ignoring the tremor in my hand. Part of me wanted to scream, but I chose silence, letting her stew instead. In the days that followed, I drafted a separation agreement with my lawyer friend's help. Claire pleaded for counseling, but I refused. I was determined to maintain my self-respect. Late one afternoon, I received a call from Dylan. I recognized his number immediately. He stammered some half-baked apology, claiming he never meant to hurt me. My hands clenched around the phone as he insisted it was a mutual lapse in judgment. I seethed at his audacity. Then I dropped a bombshell. I knew about his financial scams, and I hinted that the authorities might be very interested in his activities. He fell silent. I could almost feel his panic through the phone. I informed him that if he tried interfering with my separation from Claire or stirred trouble, I'd share everything I knew with law enforcement. He tried to bluster, but his voice trembled. I ended the call, satisfaction coursing through me. For the first time, I felt like I had real power over the situation. Claire had made her choice, and Dylan had played his part. Now they would both face the consequences. My only regret was not discovering their betrayal sooner, before it had twisted my life. Claire's attempts at reconciliation grew more desperate. She wrote me letters, detailing her remorse, painting Dylan as a manipulative influence. I read them without emotion, recalling how she'd once laughed at my gullibility. Whenever she tried to hug me, I stepped away. I slept in the guest room, ignoring her muffled sobs through the walls. My lawyer friend reassured me that everything was in motion. Soon, the papers would be filed, and Claire would be served. At work, I maintained my professionalism, but inside, bitterness fueled me. Revenge had become my lifeline, and I tenaciously held on without any mercy. Finally, the day came when Claire was served with the divorce papers at home. I watched her face as she read them. Her tears came in torrents. She clutched the documents, looking up at me, pleading. I remained stone-faced, unwilling to grant her even a sliver of comfort. She murmured that she loved me, that she'd made a terrible mistake. I replied that her actions spoke louder than any apology. Her ring, still on her finger, glinted mockingly. I told her she could keep it. It meant nothing to me now. She broke down, but I walked away resolutely, unyielding. Her pleas escalated in the following days, but I no longer cared. I blocked Dylan's number after receiving one more sniveling apology. My lawyer assured me that our case would be straightforward due to Claire's infidelity. The evidence I'd gathered was bulletproof. She would leave with only what we legally agreed upon. Friends and family caught wind of the situation. Some judged me for refusing to forgive her, but I couldn't stomach pity or misplaced advice. A man has a right to safeguard his dignity. If she thought love would triumph over betrayal, she had miscalculated spectacularly, beyond all measure. As the legal process advanced, I found myself feeling lighter. I moved my belongings into a new apartment across town. Claire stayed in the old house until we sorted property division. On our final night under the same roof, she tried one last time to talk, tears staining her cheeks. She asked if I could ever consider a future where we fix things. I answered with a cold, unwavering no. She had dismantled our marriage piece by piece, and I had no intention of piecing it back together. That night, I slept truly and utterly unburdened by her suffocating presence. The divorce was finalized in a matter of months. Claire ended up with some furniture, her personal items, and a small settlement. I kept the bulk of our savings, having carefully maneuvered assets beforehand. Dylan vanished from her life almost immediately. Rumor had it he fled the city to avoid legal trouble. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Claire was devastated, struggling financially, and living with relatives. Strangely, I felt no triumph in her misery, just a grim satisfaction that justice had been served. I carried on, no longer the clueless husband, determined to rebuild the life they'd tried to ruin. Sometimes, people ask if I miss her. The truth is, I miss the person I thought she was. But that woman never truly existed. The real Claire took advantage of my love, mocked my trust, and conspired with a coworker to betray me. She expected me to fold, to remain naive forever. Instead, I claimed my dignity, served my revenge, and moved on with my head held high. I regret the wasted years, but I won't waste another moment mourning what was never real. The only closure I needed was knowing I refused to forgive the unforgivable. That's truly enough.